Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, lace up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps.
Hey everyone, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 133 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So here I sit in my new favorite podcast recording room, my bedroom, on a frigidly cold, somewhat windy February afternoon, suddenly alone in my house. I hadn't thought of recording today. I didn't think I would get to it, but the powers to be have made it so that I can sit here and record a podcast episode. So Kenny's grocery shopping. Gracie has Jack at the dance competition, which leads me into my self-description. So if you're watching me, you'll notice that I have some makeup on, not a lot, some remnants, and these ridiculous comp earrings, they're called, competition earrings. I danced this morning. My group, Sing, 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 the old lady tap dancing group, performed today. And it was right down here at the Capitol Center for the Arts, which is always an up and down place for me because I have so many memories tied into Molly there that it's hard sometimes for me to be there and not get sort of sucked into really, really missing her in a profound way. But here I sit on a Sunday afternoon, ready to talk to all of my good folks. Sometimes I plan out my podcast, like I think of a topic I want to talk about and I research and really organize myself. And then sometimes I'm scrolling social media and I see a post that draws my attention and stays with me. And I think, you know what? This is something I could talk about, something that relates to me. So these are my notes. Here I'm showing you my notes if you're not watching. And what I came up with was a really interesting self-reflection that I'm going to share with you now. The meme was basically a word with a definition, and the word was cherophobia. Cherophobia. So chero is a Greek word for joy. So fear of joy, an irrational aversion to being happy. So someone's initial response to that would be, well, that's stupid. Why would you be afraid of being happy? But the mind is such a crazy thing that there's a lot of reasons why this can happen. And so this set me to thinking of so many patterns in my life, thinking of times when I felt like I wasn't happy or that I was suddenly anxious for no reason, or is this all there is? All these sort of feelings when things are sort of going well. And then what feels like creating drama. Now, I have people in my life that would be jumping up and down saying, ha, there you go, admitting that you create drama. And I don't know that I create it, but I certainly seek it out. And I've often just had so much self-loathing around my ability to take my perfectly calm, happy life and turn it upside down. And so many of my stories follow this. Not surprisingly, my cherophobia and such has been constant fodder and content for a lot of my therapy sessions. Why do I do this? What is it that I'm doing? So I'm going to go through what cherophobia is and some of its causes and talk a little bit about how they relate to me. But I have a feeling that they relate to a lot of us in a variety of ways. But I know I'm not the only person that oftentimes says why, turn inward on what did I do and why to make this happen. So cherophobia, an irrational aversion to being happy. People with cherophobia often avoid activities that make you happy or bring about happiness. So stay home alone or go to a party. No, I'll just stay home alone. That's fine. And it's also a belief that happiness will bring about a bad change, that if I'm too happy, it's only going to end with something bad happening. So there's that unpredictability of what might come next, that a bad event will automatically follow a good one. So this really stuck with me. I know that a big piece of my childhood sexual abuse in the self-blame department that little kids do, they blame themselves. I look at 7 and 8-year-old children now and think, how could they blame themselves for anyone abusing them? They seem so little to me. But when you're 7, that's as big as you've ever been. So you don't feel little necessarily. And I know that my abuse was spread out enough that it always happened in the middle of a tumultuous time, a season change, a holiday, a financial situation. There was always a reason. When I look back and look at the patterns now, I talked about patterns last week with my running logs. When I look at the patterns of my abuser's behavior, I realized none of it had anything to do with me. But all I could think about at my young, tender age was me and what might have happened. And I've talked about how I did things like burn pajamas and wear different pajamas and keep my room really clean and just practice all of these different behaviors to see if that would make it never happen again. Of course, Those behaviors had nothing to do with the abuse at all. But all I could do was control myself. One of the major overriding themes in my mind growing up was I would let my guard down. Things would get happy. Things would settle down at home. Family gatherings would be less contentious. It would have been long enough that it happened to me that I could forget about it. I wouldn't necessarily think about it every single day. A day might go by. And I do know that when I would realize that I hadn't thought about it for a couple of days, I'd immediately get nervous. I haven't thought about it. That means it's going to happen again. So I assumed responsibility for this. Absolute cherophobia in action right here. I made the connection that if I let my guard down, if I was too happy, if I became too okay in my life, I was inviting future abuse. That's what my little 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 7-year-old mind did. Then I read that book, The Body Keeps the Score. And this was, a couple of years ago when I first started the podcast. And one of the biggest trauma responses, it had a couple of chapters dedicated to it, was the traumatized individual recreates the trauma again and again and again. And they used the example of somebody that was in drug and alcohol treatment, horribly sexually abused in her family, like violent, horrible sexual abuse. Gets into treatment, is clean and sober for months and months, doing really well in treatment. I don't remember what the trigger was, but something happened and the girl ran away, ran into Boston, found a bunch of people doing drugs, got wasted and totally high and everything else for days on end, got raped, beaten, and then gets picked up by the police, in the hospital, back to the inpatient program. 6 months of healing go by, escapes and does it again. And, people that don't have abuse or trauma in their background to this level would scratch their heads like, what on earth? Why would you recreate for you? Why would you recreate for you something is going to be horrible and bad? And I get it. I get it because what happens is you build together all these happy months and days, and that's not a familiar feeling. Not being vigilant, being able to wake up and not be worried about, what's going to happen today, letting the day unfold, living a life where you have sort of total control over what you do and you have no fear or no lack of trust in those choices and emotions. That's an unknown feeling to a child living in a home with an abuser because the abuser is there and the child has no way of knowing when that abuse might come next. What will the trigger be? What will happen? I didn't even know the word trigger when I was 7. I didn't know that really whatever made my abuser hurt me had nothing to do with me. I was just the vehicle through which they expressed their fucked upness or anger. I have spent a lifetime messing up, quote unquote, my happiness by entering into something that will generate trauma and chaos and madness and sadness. And I can see it. And I have statements I make sometimes, like, my happiest times in my life when I don't have a boyfriend. So it isn't that I don't want to have a boyfriend, but it's that when you're in a time where you're single, there are no external factors that are unpredictable in your life. I look at some of my best races and they were when I was not in a deep, heavy relationship. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But that's sort of how it is. So I can see it. I see the patterns in my life. I learned at a very young age that prolonged periods of happiness meant badness was going to happen. And not only that it was going to happen, but that it caused it. So if I'm happy and if I'm relaxed and if I'm complacent, I'm inviting the abuse. This is a pattern that stayed with me really throughout my life. One of my other strong memories around this was when I first applied for my sabbatical in the school district. And I had this, all of a sudden got to this point where here it is 15 years into my career. And I swore I would never just settle down. And I'm halfway to 30 years of teaching. And what am I doing? And this is what I wanted. And because I was happy, I had a husband I loved at the time and 2 beautiful daughters and a beautiful home. And I was a well-known teacher and coach and I was making good money and I owned another home. Like I was so okay. I was so solid. And one by one, little by little, I just whittled away at that happiness and totally subconsciously, of course. I see now that my first big jump into creating a life that would be unhappy was my friendship with Amy. Amy brought with her all sorts of excitement in a relatively negative way and unpredictability. And what is she going to do next? And the whole dynamic in a relationship, if I say one thing and she turns it around and now uses it against me in a different way. Our friendship was contentious and bizarre from the beginning, and it made me want to be in it more. And I think what it did was it fed my desire for known chaos. So oftentimes people don't make a change because at least knowing what's next is better than not knowing. You keep your workout schedule. You don't take a big risk and try to improve. because what if you fail? So I'll just stay the way I am because I'm pretty fit and it's okay. And I don't need to get better because you don't want to risk the failure, right? So a bad known entity is better than the possibility of a great unknown entity, right? So that's sort of risk taking. Oftentimes, people with cherophobia do not take risks because they're not willing to really put anything out there. And I look at sometimes my relationship in my life, and I say that I want different things, and I don't do anything to make those different things happen. So again, I feel sometimes this is a bit of cherophobia. If I'm unhappy, then I am safe. If I am angry, then I am safe. If I am anxious, then I am safe. So that for me is my trauma response, cherophobia, and it talks about it, that trauma and history of a life where you have good followed by bad, followed by good, followed by bad is often a precursor to people developing this phobia. There's another side to cherophobia, which is the deserving piece. Being too happy will hurt others. If I'm too happy, it means I'm a bad person. So this brought back all of my post Molly's death memories. I remember being at the hospital the week she was on life support, and I laughed so many times that week because we had amazing visitors, we shared stories, and I think, at the time when Robin was so supportive of me, she made me laugh so many times. And I think she did it out of a need to care for me, to make sure I was okay. But I do know, I had a couple of mothers say, if it were my daughter who was dead, I wouldn't be able to laugh. And I remember being a bit taken aback by that. Like, okay, well, first of all, it's not your daughter, so shut up. And second of all, sometimes laughing is the only thing that sort of got me through the next 5 minutes. I've referred to this a lot as well. One of my favorite books, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a character called Chief has a quote in that book that says, if you lose your laughter, you lose your footing. And if your life becomes devoid of laughter, then you lose all your footing. So you look at cherophobia, the fear of being happy. Truly cherophobic people wouldn't want laughter of any sort. So 2 things. 1, if I laugh too much, something bad will happen to me. Or 2, if I laugh too much, people will judge me and dislike me. So I have experiences in my life where both of those things are true. The guilt I would feel over not remembering something related to Molly. I remember the first month that we didn't all sort of commemorate Death Week, the 1st to the 7th. Gracie was like, are we forgetting her? Are we forgetting her? Are we forgetting her? And I'm like, well, no, we can't for the rest of our lives be sad 1 week out of a month. That's 12 weeks a year we're sad. Like, we have to let the sadness run its course and do what it does and manifest itself in a healthy way through our grief process. But again, that was associating happiness as a negative trait or negative quality. So causes, introverts tend to be cherophobic, which would make sense if being out and about in a crowd and all the unpredictabilities of a crowd of people, that would make sense. Perfectionists, if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it at all. So I'm not going to do it at all. Or I have everything just the way I want it. And if I go do some fun thing, I might lose my balance or I might mess it up. So those are 2 sort of personality traits that can increase your likelihood of being cherophobic. But trauma is another major cause, and history of good to bad. Every time I find sort of a definition or a reason for a behavior of mine, it just makes me feel a lot better. And so what I did after looking at this quote a couple of days ago is I've just been mulling it about in my head. So I just had an appointment with Carolina the other day, and we talked a lot about how, and quite honestly, Robin and Roy, 2 of my most contentious friendships in my life, heartbreaking. Both of them would say to me, you complain all the time about the same things and you never do anything to fix them. And they're right. There's logic to that. I notice it more so now in this new self-reflective, share my life on a podcast reality of Barb. But I was looking over some notes. I was organizing notes in my appointments with Carolina. And I noticed last year in March, it's almost March now. By the time you hear this, we're almost done with March. And I had a list of things that made me unhappy or angry. And many of those things would be on a list I could create today. So what does this mean? So I also, when I think to all that's transpired in the last 12 months, I'm in a completely different place. The Molly B Foundation website is live. Huge fundraisers are planned and in the making. I did that 75 hard and the dietary changes. I've committed myself to working out, hired a coach. So many things are better in my life, I have to say. Published a book. There's one, right? But here I still have the same list of things that are keeping me unhappy. And I realize I don't address them because I need to stay unhappy, right? So all of the self-questioning I do, all of the self-reflection of looking in the mirror and saying, why? Along with the running logs that I dug out to talk about last week, I reread some of my journals, and it was actually incredibly painful to reread because so much of my pain is similar. So many of my difficulties in relationships are no different now than they were when I was married to Eric, or when I was first with Kenny, or when I dated Steve, or when I was with David, or Jim Graham, or Chaz. I just look back sometimes at my struggles and fears, and I could berate myself and say I haven't grown a bit, but I have. But the common thread for me is I always have to keep some element of fear or trauma, something I need to be vigilant about. Because if I'm feeling vigilant, then I can't get hurt. So oftentimes that would manifest for me a secondary relationship. I'd have my primary relationship, always have a secondary so that I had an escape. I had something to keep my content, happy mind occupied and anxious so that I couldn't get hurt again. I'm recreating for myself a life where I have to balance everything and control everything. So then I look at my day to day life and the things I complain about in my day to day life. I do everything around the house. I do the laundry. I do most of the cleaning. I pay the bills. I do the insurance, blah, blah, blah. Me. I do the, and I do all of it. So why do I do all of it? So the underlying truest answer is cherophobic in nature. I do all this so I can stay busy and stressed. So I cannot get complacent. I can't get too happy and too content because if I do, it's all going to fall apart. So it's funny, a Facebook meme with a little definition set in motion for me 3 days of just contemplating this aspect of my personality and how it keeps me, spinning the hamster wheel, so to speak. I don't make any progress. I'm running and running and running. I'm not getting anywhere. It does that to me, keeps me stressed, which isn't good physically, right? Adrenal fatigue and all of the physical things that I've been addressing these past months. But it also sets up stress for other people. So what comes to mind right away would be Gracie, Jack, and Kenny. So, Kenny walks on eggshells around me anyway. He has for a long, long time. And a lot of those eggshell tiptoeing comes from a million things between the two of us. But people are drawn to each other for a reason. And I think my psychology or pathology, whatever you want to call it, plays a big role in who is attracted to me and who I'm attracted to. So I look at certain relationships in my life. Eric, Sev, Roy, Bruce, my science guy. I look at those relationships as people that could insult me and compliment me in one sentence. And however I responded to it, they could turn it around and make it a compliment. It's hard to, what would be a good example? Well, so I've talked about the fact that, my first sexual experience was with a teacher of mine, a high school teacher of mine, my biology teacher. And he was 17 years older than me. And whenever there was conversation of someone finding out, he would immediately say, well, it's all on you. You're the one that pushed this and blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'm 15 years old. What does it mean to push it, right? And he would compliment my running again and again, what a great runner I was. And then he would throw in how off balance I was or how pathetic it was I wanted to be popular. So he'd compliment and insult me at the same time. I have examples in all of my relationships. With Sev, it was mostly around running. You're never going to be any good. You're never going to get ahead of your asthma. If you tried harder, you'd be great. Like all these really conflicting messages. Eric one time told me I was equal parts ugly and beautiful. Okay, that may very well be true. I look in the mirror. I know what I look like. But, when you're with somebody and you're going to marry them, that's kind of a weird thing to say, right? It's a little too honest, I think. And then Roy, all the time. He would call me a pathological liar because he would remember conversations I had that were different than they were. I could say something like, yeah, my childhood has certainly contributed to my lack of stability, to which he would then say, well, you admit you're unstable. So it was always those, I keep those people in my life. And then I have the nicer people, the relationships that are not the calculating people so much, the Chazes and the Davids and the Kennys, who mostly just really love me and want to be loved. However, we all bring our pathology in and the role that we play in our families and all of this. And I look at my relationships and I realize that if there wasn't already stress in the relationship itself, I had to bring stress into it. And this isn't a conscious, I think I'll fuck up my life. It's a very, very psychologically driven desire. And I know when I applied for my sabbatical, that was my sort of solution to a life I felt spiraling out of control. I had pulled back from my friendship with Amy. Roy was out of the picture. I had this nice sort of reprieve, a couple of years reprieve, where I felt pretty good about things. and things settled down after the sabbatical. But I remember thinking, so now I'm just back to teaching. That's it. That was my sabbatical. And now I'm just back. Like nothing great came from it. It was a really tricky process for me. And that's boom, that's when the Roy piece came in. Then I analyzed that. Like I think to myself, what is it that made me stay connected to him and in that relationship for so many years? 2009 to 2016 when Molly died, that's 7 years. And I got my text messages printed out. And I don't even remember. I've learned so much about myself in reading them. But the key thing is things will be fine. Things are fine with us. Don't worry. I'm furloughed, so I can't really make any big relationship plans right now anyway. So the way things are is fine. And then my release, and then a few weeks go by, and then suddenly he has blocked me on Facebook and he's not talking to me. And where are you? Where are you? And I can't do this anymore. You're just stringing me along. It was this back and forth, which took care of the need, right? The cherophobia. Everything's fine. It's okay. And then nothing is fine. It's terrible. And then comes my pleading and begging and jumping in the car and driving down and romantic weekends and making up. And I look at it now as so obvious. And I share it not to like further embarrass myself, but to really just try to give people a glimpse of how dynamic and intricate the world of trauma can be. And I'm just only talking about my own trauma. I don't know the trauma of Sev or Eric or Roy or Graham or Chaz or Bruce or anyone. I don't know their dramas and their tragedies and their traumas. Not intricately anyway. I mean, I know some. So I really have just been, set to thinking because a lot of my pondering around Molly's death is I created this unstable, crazy life and I wasn't paying attention to her and I missed it and she's dead. This is a continuous process for me. Some of the treatment and in the treatment, analyzing why you do these things, people with a past conflict or a tragedy often feel unsafe. And I spent most of my childhood feeling unsafe. Cherophobia is like a self-protective measure where you create for yourself a safe way of living. I'm not too happy. I'm avoiding anything that's going to make me complacent so I can keep control and keep myself at bay and take care of myself the way that I need to, right? So post Molly's death, post my job loss, post a lot of traumas, post every time I was sexually abused, immediately living in a state of chaos and confusion, vigilance and trauma. Recreating those emotions is a protective mechanism, which truly makes no sense, right? Wouldn't you think you'd feel safer when you were calmer and could think clearly? So now I look at my current life, and I know that in the aftermath of Roy cutting me off and not talking to me at all shortly after Jack was born, I had this newborn baby, so I spent a ton of time sitting and all I could do was think. And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't just think. And so I started really reaching out and coaching a ton at CFA, coaching a ton at Amaskeg. I didn't get into battle until like a year into my coaching, but I just realized that I couldn't just sit home and nurse a baby and just be a house mother, that I had to do other things. And this is the same sort of compulsion that I had right about the time I met and became friends with Amy. I was in this panic that this was my life. And right about the time I got my sabbatical, like when I look at how I'm feeling and how the circumstances of my life are at that time, I generate and create a lifestyle that will acquire in me vigilance. So where does that leave me now? Because I'm giving all these examples of when I was happy, when things were fine, and how I somehow managed to create chaos. So here I am. I live with Kenny. Kenny is who he is. He is not going to change. I can't change him. My life is my life. So I can continue to get angry with him for not measuring up in a way that I think. I think my continuous back and forth with Kenny, and his with me, quite honestly, is a bit of this, a bit of needing to keep the tension. Tension and anxiety is better than nothing, right? And our relationship will never be what it was. It can't be. Whatever it is, it's a friendship at best. And we just have to make it the best friendship we can because we share parenting of a little boy. How does this all affect Jack? Jack's biggest question to me is, you happy, mama? You happy? Show me a happy face. So he worries that I'm not happy. He'll sometimes also say, you angry? Are you angry? I know when he was a little baby, I had a lot of external anger. And I mean, he was teeny, but he heard that, right? If I'm holding him and nursing him and I'm angry, he's intuiting that anger. And so I try really hard now to placate the anger and talk him through it and let him know that my anger is not at him. But still, he's a little boy. He just feels the anger, right? So, and then I look at like my book sales and my podcast and the website. These are things that I could, if I worked on them in a meaningful way, I could make good money on them. I could support Molly's foundation. I could put money in the bank, retirement sort of money, that kind of thing. And I find 50 reasons why I can't get to things. And for a long time, the one thing that failed over and over again was the Molly B Foundation. So what do I have to stay? Is it that I have to stay unhappy and missing her? And to do that, I can't have a successful foundation because now what does that mean? It means I've accepted she's dead. Is that what it is? I think so much of it comes back to my need to live in a state of chaos to protect myself emotionally. But a chaotic state does not produce good things, right? So I took the month of January and didn't coach at all for 3 weeks. And I learned a lot from those 3 weeks. We're well into March now, and my coaching is a third of what it was before. It's made me realize that rather than a ton of coaching, what I want to do is a little bit of coaching done really well. So I don't know where the coaching piece will go for me, but it can't interfere with the Molly B stuff, right? Or my podcast or all of those things. Marketing the book is a big one. I look at my day-to-day life in my chaotic household, and I can sit on the couch and bemoan the fact that my house is a mess, or I can work on 1 box a day. And after 30 days, I've worked on 30 boxes of stuff. So I'm taking these little steps that in my therapy with Carolina, I'm mostly talking about just organizing myself and not being so all or nothing. But when I really look at it this way, that living in a state of known chaos is more predictable and safer than living in a state of unknown potential joy. I have to let this go. Like I have to just let go of the state of chaos. My cherophobia isn't just happiness. It's all of it. Contentment, relaxation, meditation, all of the things that we do to center ourselves and calm down, I avoid like the plague. I have not missed having to drive out of town 2 or 3 days a week. I don't miss it. Also gone is my desire to drive and be closer to where Roy might be. Like in the beginning, I just wanted to be where he was, even if I never spoke to him or saw him. If I knew that I was where he might have been, then I felt better. I look at that now as just so pathetic kind of, but it's a process. And I don't feel that way now. I don't have that strong tug to him, like, so that I have to be careful, right? I don't want to get too complacent. So I have to find other ways to make myself feel vigilant without entering into unhealthy behaviors. The year leading up to Molly's death, all those months, was me really at my absolute worst in a cherophobic sort of way. I just did thing after thing after thing that would maintain chaos in my life. And I was pulled into it and manipulated into it. So I'm sitting here owning it all. The piece that I'm leaving out is people like Roy and Doug and Eric are attracted to people like me. And Robin and Lenora and Steph, in terms of friendship people, someone they know they can manipulate and get to do things because I'm so intent on making people happy and having people like me that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fit in. This is a huge theme for me as well that goes right along with this whole avoidance of anything being okay. I've often always felt unpopular, a bit on the outside, like I don't have a big social circle. I have a wonderful social circle, but not when I can just at the last minute call somebody up and go have a drink. I'd have to think for a long time, who might go for a drink with me and not think it was weird. And I have often felt outside. I feel like an outsider on the school board. I sometimes feel I felt at Amoskeag when I was coaching and then my coaching shifts were taken away and, oh, you can just be our sub. It was no different than the school board and being taken off all my committees. It was like, well, what's wrong with me that people don't think I'm good at what I'm doing? And I would ache about wondering. Now I've gotten to the point now with this element of the cherophobia that I don't care. I'm feeling much better. I'm channeling my own inner power. One little Facebook meme, and I have had all of these thoughts and just hours of self-reflection. So treatments for cherophobia, not surprisingly, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I actually think I need to find a good book on this because I think it's my next step for myself. I know it worked really well for Gracie, really, really concrete steps to take to address your symptoms so that you can ameliorate your symptoms and feel better and then get to the cause of those symptoms, right? And then, of course, the standard somatic exercise, relaxation, walking, all of those things, meditation, yoga. And of course, those activities are good for everything. They're just good mental health activities. We should do them all the time. Hypnotherapy. So hypnosis. Hypnosis is a new big thing. Lots and lots of life coaches are now taking hypnotist classes. I went to the American Academy of Medical Hypnoanalysts. So these were hypnotherapists that you had to have an MD in order to practice as a medical hypnoanalyst. Because if you have an MD, then you've done a whole psychiatry rotation. But hypnotherapy, and that makes sense because so much of hypnosis is getting in such a state of deep relaxation that your mind is completely open. So you're open to memories, you're open to suggestion, you're open to taking a bad thought out and replacing it with a good thought. All of those things happen in hypnosis. So I can see where this type of phobic behavior would be well treated in hypnosis. And then exposure to happiness. So this is a little bit like the extreme phobias, like agoraphobia, people who are afraid to leave their house. So you go out and sit on your front porch for 10 minutes a day and then 20 minutes a day. And then once you can sit there for half an hour, then you do that every day. And then you add a new task, you walk to the mailbox. So it's like this sort of gradual exposure to what you're afraid of, gradual exposure to happiness. Maybe that means you drive by a birthday party, but you don't go in. I don't know. You watch a funny movie on TV and laugh, all the different ways. Sometimes it's a relief for me because it's like an answer to a question. And as the mother of 2 children in heaven, all I have is questions sometimes. And my biggest question is why? And it's the most unanswerable question there is. There is no answer to any of these whys, at least not here. That's something that I'll find out on the other side. I have that to look forward to. As Molly would say, getting all the answers. That's my podcast today. I've stirred up for you some of my poor decisions in life, some of my always needing an escape or some little exciting thing that I'm not supposed to be doing. So I have some secret to keep, like to create vigilance. It's not a way to live that I like anymore. And I do feel at age 60 that I'm really finally coming around to being able to step out of myself and look at myself and look at how I'm behaving. And I talked a lot about my month of January and how upsetting it was and how awesome it was at the same time. As I record this, I'm not quite done with February, but it's been okay. I mean, not great, but lots and lots of eye-opening experiences and lots of opportunities for me to let go and stop expecting things that aren't going to happen. I was watching The Incredibles, and one of the villain controllers there, he was walking out of the room and he was saying to Mr. Incredible, if you want to get out of the hole, put down the shovel, which is another way of saying, if you want to get out of the hole, stop digging. Or, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If you feel like you're stuck, then get out of the mud. If you feel like you're stuck in a hole, stop digging, put the shovel down and get out. And so, the more you dig, the deeper in the hole you are. And I feel like so many things in my life now are giving me opportunities to truly challenge my desire for chaos and anger and fear and anxiety, and to just let my life unfold and enjoy it and find times of enjoyment in it. I say this and I get immediately anxious. To be Barb Higgins for one day. Anyway, it was just an interesting thing. I felt like I really wanted to share it with you. I also want to share that my life is an ongoing journey of healing and self-reflection. You don't just get fixed and then go live your life as a fixed person. It doesn't work that way. I'm supposed to buy myself a present as a celebratory act for some revelations I had in my appointment with Carolina. That was on Wednesday. I was supposed to call her Wednesday night. I did not. By the time you hear this, it'll be a month later. But I'm supposed to go buy myself something or do something for myself. And I can't think of anything I need or want or what I want to do that I haven't already done. Isn't that? Look at me avoiding happiness. Look at me avoiding happiness. I need to get a t-shirt that says Cherophobia is me. Anyway, be good to yourself. And after you've been good to yourself, be good to someone else. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444. On Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.